I'm Irene, 58 years old, a single mother who sacrificed everything to raise my son Jeffrey from the time he was little. Nothing prepared me for the shock of hearing my only child call me a burden and leave me with nothing. But life has a funny way of turning tables. 5 years later, I own a $2.5 million mansion, and my son is the one with nothing. Before I tell you how I handled it when Jeffrey showed up at my door after 5 years, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you believe life always finds a way to balance the scales. The day my husband Walter walked out on us, Jeffrey was just 3 years old. I remember standing in our small apartment kitchen, still clutching the note Walter had left. Jeffrey tugged at my pants leg, asking where Daddy went. I knelt down, looking into those innocent brown eyes, and promised him I would always be there no matter what. That promise shaped the next 20 years of my life. I immediately took on a second job waiting tables at night after my day job as a receptionist. The daycare costs were crippling, but I made it work. I would rush from one job to the next, often surviving on 4 hours of sleep. When Jeffrey started school, things got a little easier, but not by much. There were so many beautiful moments during those early years. I remember Jeffrey winning his first spelling bee in second grade. His face lit up when he spotted me in the audience, despite the fact I had come straight from work still wearing my uniform. Or the time he made me a card for Mother's Day with a crayon drawing of just the two of us holding hands with a big sun overhead. Inside, he had written in his wobbly handwriting, "Me and Mommy against the world." I never wanted Jeffrey to feel the lack of his father or to feel different from the other kids. When he was invited to birthday parties at fancy places, I made sure he could attend, even if it meant picking up extra shifts to afford the gifts. I bought him the sneakers all the kids were wearing, even when mine had holes. I signed him up for baseball and soccer, sitting on cold metal bleachers, cheering him on while other parents sat in comfortable fold-out chairs with thermoses of hot drinks. College brochures started arriving when Jeffrey was in high school. I encouraged him to aim high, to dream big. We toured universities together, and I saw how his eyes lit up at the prestigious campuses. I knew then that I would do whatever it took to get him there. I had been putting aside a little money for years, never enough, but something. I had also been secretly taking night classes to qualify for better jobs, often studying late into the night after Jeffrey was asleep. I managed to secure a better position as an administrative assistant at a law firm, which helped, but college costs were still daunting. When Jeffrey was accepted to Westmore University, one of the top schools in the country, my heart nearly burst with pride. The financial aid package covered about 60%, leaving an astronomical amount for us to handle. Without hesitation, I liquidated my small retirement fund, took out a second mortgage on our modest house, and even sold my mother's jewelry to make the first year's payment. The day I drove Jeffrey to college was bittersweet. His dorm room was tiny but nice. I helped him unpack while he chatted excitedly about classes and campus activities. As I was about to leave, I hugged him tight and said, "I'm so proud of you, Jeffrey. Everything I've done has been worth it to see you here." He hugged me back and said, "Thanks, Mom. I'll make you proud." On the long drive home to our now emptier house, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness at the separation, worry about the finances, but mostly a deep sense of accomplishment. I had raised a son who was on his way to a bright future. I believed with absolute certainty that all my sacrifices would be rewarded with a close, loving relationship as Jeffrey grew into adulthood. I imagined holidays together, phone calls just to chat, and Jeffrey helping me in my later years, the way I had supported him in his early ones. I was certain I had built an unbreakable bond with my son. After all, it had been just the two of us against the world for so long. How could he not appreciate the depth of my love and sacrifice? I went to sleep that night exhausted but content, believing the hardest part of motherhood was behind me. The first sign something was changing came during Jeffrey's freshman year at Westmore. His calls home became less frequent. At first I didn't worry. He was busy adjusting to college life, making new friends, handling challenging courses. When I called him, the conversations felt rushed. "Sorry, Mom, I'm heading to study group," or "Can I call you back later?" But later rarely came. When Thanksgiving approached, I was excited to have him home. I planned his favorite meals and even took time off work. 2 days before the holiday, he called. "Mom, I think I'm going to stay here for Thanksgiving. Some friends invited me to their place in the Hamptons." I felt a pang of disappointment, but encouraged him to go. "That sounds wonderful, honey. What an opportunity. I spent Thanksgiving alone watching TV with a microwaved dinner. Christmas was better. Jeffrey came home, though he spent most of the time on his phone or out with old high school friends. When he did talk about college, it was all about his new friends. Madison, whose father owned a hotel chain. Tyler, whose family had a private jet. I was happy he was making connections, but noticed how he emphasized their wealth. By sophomore year, Jeffrey had joined a fraternity and rarely called home except when he needed money. The fraternity dues went up, or I need a new laptop for this special program. I always found a way picking up overtime and cutting back on essentials. I discovered Instagram that year and created an account mainly to see Jeffrey's photos. What I found shocked me. Pictures of lavish parties, weekends in the Bahamas, expensive restaurants, all while telling me he was totally broke and needed more money for textbooks. For his 21st birthday, I saved for months to buy him a nice watch. Nothing extravagant but quality. I mailed it with a card expressing how proud I was of him. The package was delivered, but Jeffrey never mentioned receiving it. When I finally asked, he said, "Oh, yeah, thanks. It's not really my style, though." I noticed he was wearing a much more expensive watch in his social media photos. By junior year, Jeffrey had stopped coming home for most holidays. My calls often went to voicemail. When I finally expressed my hurt, he said, "Mom, I'm building a life here. I can't keep running back to check on you." Check on me. I had never asked him to check on me. I just wanted to be part of his life. His senior year, I was determined to attend his graduation. I requested the day off work months in advance and booked a modest hotel room at considerable expense. When I arrived and called Jeffrey, he sounded annoyed. "Graduation is really more for the students, Mom. You didn't need to come." But I was there, and he grudgingly gave me directions to meet him. The ceremony was in a beautiful outdoor quad. When I arrived, excited to see my son in his cap and gown, I found he had saved me a seat in the very back row behind a large column. I could barely see the stage. Afterward, I spotted him taking photos with a group of well-dressed people. I approached, and Jeffrey introduced me with obvious discomfort. "This is Irene. She raised me. Not my mother, but Irene." One woman in expensive pearls looked me up and down, taking in my department store dress, and said, "How nice you could make it." Later, I overheard Jeffrey telling someone I was the help who had raised him. My heart cracked a little more. In the years after graduation, Jeffrey moved to the city for a job at a financial firm. His starting salary was more than I had ever made. I was so proud and thought now that school stress was over, we could reconnect. I suggested visiting his new apartment. "Not a good time, Mom. The place is a mess." This continued for months. Every suggested visit met with an excuse. Meanwhile, his social media showed a beautiful apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and modern furniture. Then I met Melissa. Jeffrey finally invited me to dinner, and I was thrilled until I realized it was because his new girlfriend wanted to meet me. Melissa came from wealth. You could tell by the casual way she wore designer clothes and ordered the most expensive wine without glancing at the price. Throughout dinner, they discussed people and places I knew nothing about. When I tried to share stories of Jeffrey's childhood, he would cut me off. "Mom, nobody wants to hear about that." Melissa looked at me with a mix of pity and distaste. As we were leaving, I heard Melissa whisper to Jeffrey, "You never told me she was so ordinary." I cried the whole way home. My son was embarrassed by me. The woman who had given him everything was now someone to be ashamed of. Still, I made excuses for him. He was establishing himself in a new social circle. He was busy building his career. He would come around once he felt more secure. I held on to this hope even as evidence mounted that Jeffrey was deliberately keeping me at a distance, that he saw me as an embarrassment, a reminder of a humble beginning he was trying to erase. The economic downturn hit suddenly. The law firm where I had worked for 15 years merged with a larger firm, and dozens of positions were eliminated, including mine. At 53, finding a new job proved nearly impossible. "We're looking for someone with more current skills," or "we need someone who can grow with the company long term." My savings, depleted from supporting Jeffrey through college, dwindled rapidly. I downsized from my small house to an apartment, then to a room in a shared house. Each month, the bills became more frightening. The mortgage company began foreclosure proceedings on my house, which was my only significant asset. I called Jeffrey, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. I'm going through a rough patch, honey. I hate to ask, but could you help with a loan until I find another job? Things are tight right now, Mom. Year-end bonuses haven't come in yet, he said, though his Instagram showed pictures of his new sports car. Just enough for this month's rent, I pleaded. I'll see what I can do, he promised. No money came. After 3 more desperate calls over the next 2 weeks with no response, I made a decision. I would go to his office in the city. Surely, face to face, he would understand the seriousness of my situation. I spent my last $20 on the bus ticket. His office building was intimidating, all glass and steel. The receptionist looked dubious when I said I was Jeffrey Turner's mother, but called up to his office. After a long wait, Jeffrey appeared in the lobby, clearly annoyed. Mom, what are you doing here? I'm in the middle of a workday. I've been trying to reach you. I'm about to be evicted. I need help, Jeffrey. His eyes darted around the lobby, checking if anyone was watching this interaction. Let's not do this here. Meet me at the Capitol Grill at 7. I spent the afternoon in the public library to stay warm, then walked the 10 blocks to the restaurant because I couldn't afford a taxi or subway fare. The Capitol Grill was the kind of place I had never been. Crystal chandeliers, leather booths, waiters in formal attire. Jeffrey was already seated in a corner booth far from the windows. He didn't stand when I approached. You look terrible, he said as I sat down. I haven't been sleeping well, I admitted. The stress. What do you want to eat? He interrupted, not making eye contact, checking his phone repeatedly. I ordered the least expensive item on the menu, still painfully aware it cost more than my food budget for a week. Jeffrey ordered a $90 steak and an expensive bottle of wine. He didn't offer me any. I've lost my job, I began. The house is in foreclosure. I'm staying in a room, but I can't make next month's rent. I just need a little help until... Until what? Jeffrey cut in. Until you find another job at your age, be realistic. His words stung, but I pressed on. I just need a few months of support. I've applied for positions. Something will come through. Jeffrey set down his phone and finally looked at me. His expression wasn't one of concern, but annoyance mixed with disgust. Mom, you've always been a burden. I've given you enough. It's time you figure things out for yourself. The words hit me like physical blows, a burden, me. The woman who had worked multiple jobs, sacrificed relationships, health, and financial security to give him everything. Jeffrey, I gave up everything for you, I whispered, tears forming. And that was your choice, he said coldly. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask you to sacrifice. That's on you. I sat stunned as he motioned for his assistant, who had apparently been waiting nearby. The young man approached and handed me an envelope. There's $2,000 in there, Jeffrey said. That should help you get back on your feet. Don't contact me at work again. He stood, dropped several $100 bills on the table for his barely touched meal, and walked out without saying goodbye, without a hug, without even a backward glance. I sat there clutching the envelope, too shocked to move. $2,000, the amount he probably spent on a weekend away. An amount that would delay but not prevent my homelessness. I made the money last as long as I could, but within 2 months, I received the final eviction notice. The room I had been renting was needed for the landlord's nephew. I had 48 hours to leave. With nowhere else to go, I began sleeping in my 15-year-old car, parking in different lots each night to avoid attention. When the car was repossessed another month later, I found myself truly homeless for the first time in my life. The homeless shelter was a large room with cots spaced 3 feet apart. I arrived with 1 suitcase containing all I had left. The intake worker, a kind-faced woman about my age, took my information without judgment. First time, she asked gently. I nodded, unable to speak through my shame. It gets easier, she said. Not better, but easier. That night, lying on the thin mattress, listening to the sounds of 30 other women breathing, crying, occasionally arguing, I hit rock bottom. My son, my only child, had called me a burden and abandoned me to this. The son I had read bedtime stories to every night for years. The son whose science fair projects I had stayed up all night helping with. The son I had taught to ride a bike, to tie his shoes, to be kind to others. That night, I finally allowed myself to feel the full force of the betrayal. Jeffrey didn't love me. Perhaps he never had. I was just a stepping stone on his path to the life he felt he deserved. Now that he had reached his destination, the stepping stone could be discarded. The first night at Hope Haven Women's Shelter, I cried silently into my thin pillow until there were no tears left. Women of all ages surrounded me, each with her own story of loss or betrayal or bad luck. In the harsh fluorescent light, I could see a woman in her 70s carefully organizing her few possessions in a plastic bin. Another woman about my age stared blankly at the ceiling, her face a mask of resignation. I felt a deep sense of shame. How had I ended up here? I had always been responsible, always worked hard, always put others first. Now, I had nothing and nowhere to go. The next morning, I forced myself to shower in the communal bathroom, trying to maintain some dignity. The water was lukewarm, the soap harsh. When I finished, I put on my cleanest outfit and tried to make myself presentable for job hunting. "You're wasting your time," said a woman watching me apply makeup using a cracked compact mirror. "Nobody hires shelter women for office jobs." I ignored her and went out anyway, spending the day going from business to business asking for applications. Most looked at my age and handed me an online link instead of a paper application. Some places didn't even do that once they heard my current address was a shelter. That night, exhausted and discouraged, I checked my phone one last time before the shelter's lights out policy. I had been trying to reach Jeffrey every day, leaving voicemails and texts. This time, I discovered he had blocked my number. In desperation, I created a new email account and sent him a message explaining my situation. The next day, it bounced back. He had blocked that too. That evening, I borrowed another resident's phone to check social media. Jeffrey had not made his accounts private. The most recent post showed him on a yacht in the Mediterranean. The caption read, "Annual family vacation with the people who matter most." The pictures showed Jeffrey, his girlfriend Melissa, and an older couple who must have been her parents. They were all smiling, tanned, and carefree, glasses of champagne in hand. I zoomed in on the images, studying the faces of these people my son now considered family. Melissa's parents looked distinguished, polished, the kind of people who belonged in Jeffrey's new world, the kind of mother he wished he had. I scrolled further and found a comment from one of Jeffrey's friends, "Where's your mom this year?" Jeffrey's reply made my blood run cold. "She passed away last year. Cancer." He had killed me off, erased me from his life so completely that he was telling people I was dead. I stumbled outside the shelter, gasping for air. The betrayal was absolute now. There was no misunderstanding, no explanation that could soften this blow. My son hadn't just abandoned me. He had annihilated me from his narrative. Back inside, I sat on my cot staring into space when an older woman named Eleanor sat down beside me. "Bad day?" she asked, her voice gentle but knowing. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Want to talk about it? I'm a good listener. God knows I've got nothing but time these days." Something about her kind eyes broke through my numbness. I found myself telling her everything. About raising Jeffrey alone, sacrificing everything, putting him through college, and how he had repaid me by calling me a burden and abandoning me. How he was now telling people I was dead. Eleanor listened without interruption. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "My daughter did something similar," she finally said. "Different circumstances, same result. I haven't seen her in 8 years." "How do you bear it?" I asked. "One day at a time, and by remembering that their rejection doesn't define us. We are more than mothers. We were women before they came along, and we can be women after they're gone from our lives." I thought about that for a long time. Who was I if not Jeffrey's mother? Who had I been before him? Who could I be now? The next day, I pawned my wedding ring, the last valuable thing I owned. It was a simple gold band that had survived numerous financial crises over the years because of its sentimental value. Walter had placed it on my finger 25 years earlier, making promises he wouldn't keep. I had kept it all these years as a reminder of a happier time. Now, it represented just another broken promise. The pawn shop gave me $300 for it, enough for a few weeks of food if I was careful. As I left the shop, the finality of the transaction hit me. I had now lost everything connecting me to my past. My home, my possessions, my son, and now this last token of my former life. I walked back to the shelter in a daze, barely noticing the fall leaves swirling around my feet. At a stoplight, I caught my reflection in a store window. A thin, tired woman with gray, streaked hair and defeated posture. I barely recognized myself. That evening, Eleanor found me again. She placed a flyer in my hands for a job fair happening the next day. "They're looking for all kinds of positions," she said. "Retail, food service, office work." "I've been trying," I said. "Nobody wants to hire someone my age." "So lie," she said bluntly. "Dye your hair, take 10 years off your resume. Do what you need to do." I looked at her, surprised by her pragmatism. "We don't have the luxury of playing by the rules anymore," she continued. "The rules weren't made for women like us." Later that night, as I lay on my cot listening to the sounds of the shelter, I made a vow to myself. I would not die in this shelter. I would not let my son's rejection be the final chapter of my story. Somehow, I would rebuild my life, and I would never, ever let anyone make me feel worthless again. Looking into the small mirror in the shelter bathroom the next morning, I straightened my shoulders and said aloud, "I am not defined by my son's rejection. I am not a burden. I am Irene Turner, and I will survive this." It wasn't much, but it was a start, a tiny spark of defiance in the darkness that had become my life. The next morning, I borrowed some makeup from a younger woman at the shelter and carefully applied it to minimize the signs of stress and age. I put on my last clean business outfit, a navy skirt suit that hung loose on my frame after weeks of shelter food, and headed to the job fair Eleanor had told me about. The community center was crowded with job seekers. I stood in various lines, filling out applications, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. By midday, I had spoken with representatives from several retail stores, a hospital looking for administrative staff, and a few restaurants. No one seemed particularly interested in a 53-year-old woman with outdated skills and a gap in employment. I was about to leave when I noticed a small booth in the corner with a sign reading, "Magnolia Coffee House." The young woman behind the table looked up as I approached. "Hi there. I'm Sophia. Are you interested in joining our team?" Her genuine smile caught me off guard after hours of polite dismissal from other recruiters. "I'm Irene. I have office experience, but I'm willing to do anything at this point. We need counter help for our morning shift," Sophia said. "It starts at 5:30 a.m. The pay isn't great, but the tips are decent, and you get a free meal each shift." A job where I could eat regularly was exactly what I needed. "I can start immediately," I said. Sophia handed me an application. "Fill this out and come by the shop tomorrow morning. We'll do a trial run." That evening, I returned to the shelter with a spark of hope. A job, even a low-paying one, was the first step toward independence. The coffee shop was warm and inviting when I arrived the next morning at 5 a.m. Sophia showed me the basics of operating the espresso machine, the point-of-sale system, and food preparation. By the end of my trial shift, my feet ached, but Sophia offered me the job. 6 days a week with Mondays off, she explained. "We can pay $9 an hour plus tips. You'll need a bank account for direct deposit." I nodded, not mentioning I no longer had a bank account. That was a problem for another day. For the next 3 weeks, I walked the mile to Magnolia Coffee House for my early morning shift, returning to the shelter each night. I saved every dollar, keeping my money in a pouch under my clothes while I slept. The shelter had a 30-day maximum stay policy, and my time was running out. One afternoon during my break, I noticed a flyer on the community bulletin board, "Free digital skills classes at the public library." I tore off a tab with the information. That evening, I made my way to the library. The class was being held in a small room with about a dozen computers. The instructor, a graduate student named Marcus, was teaching basic computer skills, but also offered more advanced lessons in graphic design, something I had always been interested in but never had time to pursue. "I used to doodle and draw when I was younger," I told Marcus after class, "but I never had formal training." "You don't need formal training these days," he said. "Just practice and the right software. You can use the library computers anytime to work on projects." Every evening after work, I began spending hours at the library watching tutorials, practicing design principles, creating simple logos and flyers. Marcus was generous with his knowledge, staying after class to answer questions and provide guidance. By the time my shelter stay ended, I had saved enough from my coffee shop job to rent a tiny room in a shared house on the outskirts of town. The room barely fit a twin bed and a small desk I found on the street, but it was mine. I continued working at the coffee shop and spending evenings at the library, slowly building a portfolio of design work. One morning, about 4 months after starting at Magnolia, I was serving a regular customer named David, who always ordered the same thing, a large black coffee and an almond croissant. David usually worked on his laptop while he ate, and I noticed he was struggling with the presentation. "The layout is all wrong," he muttered to himself. Before I could stop myself, I said, "If you moved that text block to the left and balanced it with an image on the right, it would flow better." David looked up, surprised. "You know design?" "A little," I admitted. "I've been teaching myself." "Show me," he said, turning his laptop toward me. During my break, I made a few suggestions and demonstrated some basic principles. David was impressed. "I run a small marketing firm," he explained. "We have a project coming up that needs some fresh eyes. Would you be interested in freelancing?" That first small project led to another and then another. David was pleased with my work and began recommending me to colleagues. I saved enough to buy a secondhand laptop and could now work from my tiny room instead of the library. 6 months later, I had enough freelance work to reduce my coffee shop hours to part-time. 8 months in, I was able to rent a small studio apartment. I still lived frugally, saving as much as possible, but for the first time since losing my home, I felt like I was building something. I created business cards and a simple website showcasing my growing portfolio. I joined online forums for designers, absorbing knowledge, asking questions, offering help where I could. Slowly, my client list grew beyond David's connections. A year after starting at the coffee shop, I was earning enough from design work to quit and focus on freelancing full-time. I specialized in branding for small businesses, creating logos, websites, and marketing materials that were clean, professional, and affordable. David continued to be a mentor and friend. When a position opened at his firm for a junior designer, he encouraged me to apply. "I make more freelancing," I told him. "Yes, but you'll have stability benefits and a chance to work on bigger projects," he countered. "Plus, you've been working in isolation. Being part of a team might be good for you." I took the job, and David was right. Working with other creative professionals accelerated my growth as a designer. I absorbed everything, staying late to learn new software, volunteering for challenging projects, making myself indispensable. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior designer. By year 3, I was leading my own team and had doubled my salary. I had moved to a comfortable one-bedroom apartment and built a modest savings account. I still lived simply haunted by how quickly financial security could vanish. In my rare moments of reflection, I sometimes thought about Jeffrey. I had stopped trying to contact him long ago. His social media showed a life of continuous prosperity, a promotion to vice president at his firm, a lavish wedding to Melissa, a honeymoon in Bali. There were no mentions of me dead or otherwise. I had ceased to exist in his world. One evening after work, I was having dinner with David and his wife Susan when they asked about my family. "I don't have any," I said automatically. It was my standard response now. "Everyone has someone," Susan pressed gently. Perhaps it was the wine, or perhaps enough time had passed, but I found myself telling them about Jeffrey, about raising him alone, sacrificing everything, putting him through college, and how he had repaid me by calling me a burden and abandoning me to homelessness. How he now pretended I had never existed. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then David spoke. "I have an idea," he said. "You've been talking about wanting to do something meaningful, something that helps others. What if we created an app specifically for women over 50 looking for work? A platform that matches skills with opportunities, offers training, maybe even emergency housing assistance." The idea resonated deeply. "Who would fund something like that?" I asked. "We could start small, bootstrap it," David said. "I have connections. You have the design skills and the lived experience. We could make this happen." That conversation was the genesis of Second Chapter, an app designed to help women over 50 rebuild their lives after setbacks. We started small working evenings and weekends. I poured all my personal experience into making it intuitive and dignified. David handled the business side, securing small investments from friends and colleagues. 3 months after launch, a popular tech blog featured Second Chapter in an article about apps making social impact. Suddenly, we had thousands of downloads and inquiries from investors. 6 months in, we secured serious funding and could work on the app full-time. I left my position at the marketing firm, though David remained a partner and advisor. We rented a small office space and hired 3 employees. Second chapter grew rapidly. We added features based on user feedback, a community forum, skill sharing, temporary housing connections. We partnered with companies committed to age diversity in hiring. We created training programs specifically designed for women re entering the workforce. A year after launch, we were featured in a major business magazine. The article included my personal story from homelessness to tech entrepreneur. The response was overwhelming. Women reached out with their own stories, thanking me for creating a platform that recognized their value and potential. Investors took notice too. In our second round of funding, second chapter was valued at $12 million. We expanded to a proper office with a team of 20 people. I was now the CEO of a growing tech company with a salary and equity that would have seemed impossible during those dark days in the shelter. 5 years after Jeffrey had called me a burden and abandoned me, I stood in the entryway of my new home, a beautiful craftsman-style house in an upscale neighborhood valued at $2.5 million. It had 4 bedrooms, a home office, and a garden with a small guest house. It was more space than I needed, but after years of having nothing, I wanted the security of owning something substantial. As I placed my keys on the entryway table, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Gray hair, now elegantly styled posture, confident designer clothes that fit perfectly. The defeated woman in the shelter was gone. In her place stood someone strong, successful, and most importantly, at peace with her past. I had done this, all of it, without help, without family, without Jeffrey. The thought didn't bring bitterness anymore, just a quiet pride. I had rebuilt my life on my own terms. Whatever happened next, no one could take that away from me. It was a Sunday morning in early spring. I was enjoying my coffee on the back porch, watching the garden come to life after winter, when the doorbell rang. Probably a package delivery, I thought, as I made my way to the front door. I opened it to find a man standing there, thin and unkempt, wearing wrinkled clothes that had once been expensive. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. Then he spoke. Mom. The voice was familiar yet strange, like a song heard long ago. Jeffrey, my son, standing on my doorstep after 5 years of silence. My heart hammered in my chest. My hands trembled. A rush of emotions battled for dominance, shock, anger, curiosity, and somewhere deep down, a flicker of the maternal love I had spent years trying to extinguish. What are you doing here? I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. Can I come in? Please. He looked over his shoulder nervously, as if expecting someone to be watching. I hesitated, then stepped back to allow him inside. Self-preservation warred with curiosity. What could possibly have brought him here? After all this time, Jeffrey stepped into the foyer, his eyes widening as he took in the elegant furnishings, the soaring ceiling, the artwork on the walls. This is your house? He asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Yes, I replied simply. Follow me. I led him through the house, perversely enjoying his growing astonishment as we moved from the living room with its stone fireplace to the gourmet kitchen, the formal dining room, and finally to the sunroom overlooking the backyard and garden. Would you like some coffee? I asked, gesturing to a chair. Jeffrey nodded and sat down, perched awkwardly on the edge of the seat like a visitor afraid of breaking something valuable. I busied myself preparing a cup, giving my racing thoughts time to settle. When I handed him the coffee, I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. Thank you, he murmured, taking a sip. This is a beautiful home. It serves my needs, I said neutrally. Now, why are you here, Jeffrey? How did you find me? He set the cup down carefully. I saw an article about you in Business Weekly, about your app and your story. He paused. Your story about being homeless. I said nothing, waiting. Were you really homeless, Mom? He asked, his voice small. Yes, I replied. For 3 months. After you called me a burden and blocked my number, after you told people I was dead. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I'm sorry, he whispered. Are you? I asked. Or are you sorry about whatever has brought you to my door looking like you've been sleeping in your car? Jeffrey's face crumpled. Everything's gone, he admitted. The job, the money, Melissa, all of it. Tell me... I said not from sympathy, but a desire to understand exactly what had driven him to seek me out after so long. The story emerged in halting sentences. Jeffrey had been fired for ethical violations at his firm, something involving client funds. There were no criminal charges, but he was effectively blacklisted in the financial industry. Melissa had left him taking their savings. Her parents, who had provided connections and financial support, cut all ties. "I've been sleeping on friends' couches," he said, "but they're tired of me now. I have nowhere else to go." "What about your in-laws, the ones you took to Italy while telling people I was dead?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. Jeffrey looked down. "They never liked me for myself, just what I represented. Once I lost my position. And what do you want from me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I need a place to stay," he said. "Just until I get back on my feet. I'll do anything. I can help around the house. I noticed your garden needs work." The irony was almost too much. My son, who had once called me a burden, was now asking to be my burden. "Why should I help you?" I asked, genuinely curious about his answer. Jeffrey looked up, his eyes wet. "Because you're my mother. Because I have no one else." "I was your mother 5 years ago, too," I reminded him, "when I had no one else." He hung his head. "I know. What I did was unforgivable. Yet here you are, asking for forgiveness and shelter and support." "I'm not the same person I was then," he said. "I've learned some hard lessons." "So have I replied. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway marking the seconds of this surreal reunion. Finally, I spoke. "Do you remember what you said to me that day at the Capitol Grill?" Jeffrey nodded miserably. "Say it," I insisted. "I want to hear you say the words." He swallowed hard. "I said you had always been a burden, and that I had given you enough, that it was time for you to figure things out yourself." His voice was barely audible. "Those words sent me to a homeless shelter," I said. "They nearly destroyed me." "I'm sorry," he repeated. "I was selfish and cruel. I was caught up in a world where people like you, like the real me, didn't belong. I thought I could become someone else by cutting ties with my past." "And now, you want what from me exactly?" I pressed. "A room in my mansion, money, forgiveness." "All of it," he admitted. "Any of it. Whatever you're willing to give. I'll take anything." I studied my son, trying to see beyond the disheveled appearance to his true intentions. Was this genuine remorse or simply desperation? Did it matter? "You said I was always a burden." I repeated the words, still sharp after all these years. "Yet now you're asking to be mine." Jeffrey looked up, his face a mask of shame and desperation. "Please, Mom. I have nowhere else to go." A heavy silence hung in the air after Jeffrey's plea. Through the window, I could see my carefully tended garden, the result of countless hours of solitary work. A physical representation of the life I had rebuilt. "How long has it been since you've had a proper meal?" I finally asked, noticing the hollows in his cheeks. "A few days," Jeffrey admitted. "I've been living on fast food when I can afford it." I rose and moved to the kitchen more to give myself space to think than from a desire to feed him. As I mechanically prepared a simple sandwich, memories washed over me. Jeffrey as a toddler reaching for me with jam-covered hands. Jeffrey as a teenager rolling his eyes when I asked about his day. Jeffrey as a young man looking at me with disgust across a restaurant table. When I returned with the sandwich, he devoured it without speaking. Once he finished, I decided it was time for honesty. "I'm not going to lie to you, Jeffrey. Seeing you here brings back a lot of pain." He nodded, not meeting my eyes. "When you abandoned me, I lost everything. Not just my home and financial security, but my identity, my self-worth, my belief in the goodness of people." My voice remained steady as I continued. "I had to rebuild myself from nothing. I had to learn who I was beyond being your mother." "I understand," he said quietly. "No, you don't," I corrected him. "You can't possibly understand what it's like to be 53 years old and sleeping on a cot in a room full of strangers, knowing your only child has told people you're dead." Jeffrey flinched. "But I do understand what it's like to have nothing," I continued. "To be desperate, to need someone to give you a chance." Hope flickered across his face. "I'm not going to turn you away," I said finally. but I'm also not going to make this easy. Anything, he said quickly. I'll do anything. I considered my next words carefully. There's a guest house behind the garden. You can stay there, not in the main house. It's small but comfortable. Thank you, he breathed relief, washing over his features. I'm not finished, I said. If you stay here, you'll work. Not for me personally, but for Second Chapter. We run a program helping women who are rebuilding their lives after setbacks, many of them homeless or escaping bad situations. You'll work with them 40 hours a week minimum wage. His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. I can do that. You'll also attend counseling, I continued. I want to believe you've changed, but words are easy. I need to see sustained effort. Of course, he agreed. And one more thing, I added. You need to understand that our relationship has changed permanently. I'm not the same woman who raised you who would do anything for your approval. I've built a life that I value with or without you in it. If you want to be part of that life, you'll need to earn your place in it. Jeffrey swallowed hard. I understand. Do you? I asked skeptically. Because 5 years ago, you were willing to erase me completely. You need to understand that I'm offering you shelter and a chance to work, not unconditional love and support. That has to be earned back, if it can be at all. I know I don't deserve your help, he said. I wouldn't blame you if you turned me away. The fact that you're willing to give me any chance at all means more than I can say. I stood up. The guest house has basic furnishings. There's a small kitchen and bathroom. I'll expect you at the Second Chapter office tomorrow morning at 8. The address is on the business card on the counter. Don't be late. Jeffrey stood as well, looking slightly dazed by how quickly things were moving. Thank you, Mom. I won't disappoint you again. I met his eyes directly. This isn't about disappointing me, Jeffrey. This is about you becoming someone who deserves respect, including self-respect. Now I have work to do. I'll show you to the guest house. That first week was awkward. Jeffrey reported to work each day, returning to the guest house in the evenings. We rarely crossed paths by my design. I needed space to process my feelings about his sudden reappearance in my life. At the end of the week, I received a report from his supervisor at Second Chapter. Jeffrey had been punctual, respectful, and hardworking, if somewhat out of his depth in an environment so different from his previous corporate life. He seems genuinely humbled by the women's stories, the supervisor noted, and they've been pretty tough on him, especially once they found out he's your son. The following weeks established a pattern. Jeffrey worked at Second Chapter during the day, attended counseling twice a week, and spent evenings in the guest house. Occasionally, we would have a brief civil exchange about practical matters, but nothing deeper. Then, one evening, about a month after his arrival, Jeffrey knocked on my door. When I answered, he looked nervous but determined. I made dinner, he said, in the guest house. Nothing fancy, just pasta. I thought maybe we could eat together, if you want. I hesitated, then nodded. I'll bring the wine. Dinner was strained at first, both of us careful with our words. The pasta was overcooked, the sauce from a jar, but I didn't comment on it. How are things at Second Chapter? I asked. Eye-opening, Jeffrey replied. There's a woman there, Margaret, who reminds me of you. Same age, similar background. She was abandoned by her family after a health crisis wiped out her savings. I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Seeing her, hearing her story, it makes what I did to you so much more real. He set down his fork. I've been trying to understand why I treated you that way. My counselor says part of making amends is understanding the why, not to excuse it, but to make sure it never happens again. And what have you concluded? I asked. That I was ashamed, he said simply. Not of you, but of myself, of my background. I wanted so badly to belong in that world of privilege that I convinced myself I deserved to be there. And you were a reminder that I didn't, that everything I had came from your sacrifice. It was the most insight I had ever heard from my son. Whether it came from genuine reflection or was rehearsed for his counselor, I couldn't be sure. There's something else, he said. Something I need to tell you. I braced myself. I've been offered a job, a real one, at a community bank. Nothing like my old position, just entry level, but it's a start. I wanted to let you know I'll be moving out soon. I've found an affordable apartment nearby. This surprised me. You're welcome to stay longer if you need to, I said. not sure why I was offering. Jeffrey shook his head. I need to do this on my own. You were right about earning self-respect. I can't do that while living in your guest house. After dinner, as Jeffrey walked me back to the main house, he stopped on the garden path. I want you to know something, he said. Even if you never fully forgive me, even if we never rebuild our relationship, I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of being your son. Not because I expect anything from you, but because it's the right thing to do. For the first time since his return, I felt something other than anger or wariness toward him. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Over the next few months, Jeffrey moved into his small apartment but continued working at Second Chapter. He was promoted to program coordinator using his financial background to teach budgeting skills to the women in the program. We began having dinner together once a week. Gradually, conversation became easier. We discovered common ground in our work and our desire to help others avoid the hardships we had experienced. One evening, Jeffrey arrived for dinner looking troubled. What's wrong? I asked as they served the meal I had prepared. I met someone today, he said. A new woman in the program. Her son abandoned her after his career took off. She's been living in her car for 2 months. I waited, sensing there was more. I could have been talking to you 5 years ago, he continued. The parallels were so egg-decked it was frightening. She even showed me a picture of her son. He looks successful, happy. Meanwhile, she's lost everything. What did you tell her? I asked. The truth, he said, that I had done the same thing to my mother, that it was the greatest mistake of my life, that her son might someday realize what he'd done, or he might not, but that her worth wasn't dependent on his recognition of it. Good advice, I said quietly. I called her son afterward, Jeffrey admitted. She gave me his number. I told him who I was and what I had done to you. I told him he still had time to make a different choice. And he hung up on me, Jeffrey said. But I'm going to keep trying, for her sake. In that moment, I saw genuine change in my son. Not perfection, not complete redemption, but real growth. The entitled young man who had called me a burden was being replaced by someone with empathy, someone who understood the consequences of his actions. Our relationship continued to evolve. We would never recapture the uncomplicated love of his early childhood. Too much had happened. Too many harsh words had been spoken, too many bridges burned. But we were building something new, something based on mutual respect rather than obligation or dependency. 5 years after Jeffrey's return on the 10th anniversary of the day he had called me a burden, we sat together in my garden. Second Chapter had grown into a nationally recognized organization. Jeffrey now ran a financial literacy program for vulnerable populations inspired by his work with us. I had recently been named one of the country's top social entrepreneurs. I was thinking about something today, Jeffrey said as we watched the sunset, about the day you let me stay in the guest house. What about it? I asked. You could have turned me away. After what I did to you, no one would have blamed you, but you didn't. You gave me a chance to earn my way back. I considered this. I didn't do it for you, not really. I did it because I knew what it was like to have nothing to need someone to give you a chance. I couldn't be the person who turned away someone in need, even you, especially you. You're a better person than I am, Jeffrey said. No, I corrected him. I just learned my lessons earlier, the hard way. We sat in companionable silence as the last light faded from the sky. Our relationship would never be perfect, never be unmarked by the past. But it had evolved into something real and honest, built on a foundation of hard-earned wisdom rather than obligation. I had come to understand that the greatest gift I could give my son wasn't unconditional forgiveness or unlimited support. It was the opportunity to become a better person than he had been, to earn back his own self-respect as well as mine. And the greatest gift I had given myself was the knowledge that I was more than a mother, more than Jeffrey's parent. I was Irene Turner, a woman of strength and resilience who had rebuilt her life from nothing and now helped others do the same. Sometimes love isn't about forgiving and forgetting. Sometimes it's about creating firm boundaries that allow both people to grow into their best selves. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to hold them accountable while still offering them a path to redemption. And sometimes the most important person to love is yourself. As night fell over my garden, I felt a sense of peace that had been hard won. My journey from homelessness to success had taught me that we are not defined by those who reject us, but by how we choose to rise above that rejection. We are defined not by our lowest moments, but by how we rebuild from them. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal or loss? How did you find the strength to start over? Share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and second chances. Remember, it is never too late to write a new chapter in your life story. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the strength to rise again.